The knife came out of the darkness so fast that Mia Turner almost missed it. She was standing behind the counter of the Silver Spoon Diner, wiping down the same spot for the third time, when the front door burst open, and a man fell against the frame. Rain poured behind him in sheets, and for one strange second, lightning lit up his face. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his shirt was torn at the side. Something dark was spreading across the fabric. Mia dropped the rag. "Sir, are you hurt?" she asked, already moving around the counter. The man lifted his head. His eyes were a strange shade of amber, almost glowing under the diner lights. He looked at her like he was trying to decide if she was a threat or not, which struck her as odd, since he was the one bleeding. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice was tight with pain. "I just need water." Mia did not believe him for a second. She had grown up in a house where her father hid his pain until it was too late, and she had learned to read the signs. The way this man held his ribs, the way his breathing came in short, careful pulls, the way his gaze kept flicking toward the door, like he was expecting someone else to walk through it. "Sit down," she said, pulling out a chair at the nearest booth. "I'll get the first aid kit." He hesitated, then sat, moving like every motion cost him something. Mia hurried into the back room, her heart pounding for reasons she could not explain. It was almost midnight. The diner was empty except for the old cook, Walter, who was already dozing in the kitchen with the radio playing low jazz. The town of Ridgemont was quiet this time of year, tucked between hills and a thick forest that most people avoided after dark, though nobody ever said exactly why. When she came back with the kit, the stranger had pulled his shirt aside just enough to look at the wound himself. It was a long gash across his ribs, angry and red, but already it looked less deep than it should have been, for someone who had clearly been running. "That needs stitches," Mia said, kneeling beside him with antiseptic and gauze. "It will heal," he said simply. She almost laughed. "It's not going to heal itself in the next 5 minutes, sir. Let me clean it at least." He watched her hands as she worked, quick and steady, despite the late hour, and her own tiredness. She had been on her feet for 10 hours already, but something about this moment sharpened her focus. There was a stillness to him, a kind of coiled control, like a man used to commanding rooms much larger than a small-town diner. "What's your name?" she asked, mostly to fill the silence. "Damon," he said, after a pause that suggested he was deciding whether to lie. "I'm Mia," she said. "You're not from around here." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." She wrapped the gauze around his ribs, tying it off with practiced hands. "You should really see a doctor. Ridgemont General isn't far." "I could call someone." "No," he said quickly, sharper than before. "No hospitals. No calls." Mia frowned, sitting back on her heels. Up close, she could see faint lines near his eyes, not from age, but from something heavier. Worry, maybe. Or grief. His jaw was tight, and his gaze kept drifting to the window, to the darkness beyond the rain-streaked glass. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" she asked quietly. Damon looked at her then, really looked, as if reconsidering something. "You should forget you ever saw me tonight," he said. "For your own good." "That's not really an answer. It's the only one I can give you." Mia should have let it go. She should have handed him a glass of water, taken his money if he offered any, and gone back to wiping down the counter until her shift ended. That would have been the smart thing to do, but there was something in the way he said it, some deep and tired honesty, that made her stay kneeling in front of him a moment longer. "Fine," she said. "I won't ask, but you're not leaving until that bleeding stops." A flicker of something crossed his face, surprise maybe, or the faintest trace of a smile. "You're stubborn. I've been called worse," she said, standing up to get him that glass of water after all. She had just turned toward the counter when she felt it, a strange awareness prickling at the back of her neck. She glanced toward the window and saw a shape move across the parking lot outside, quick and low, barely visible through the rain. Her stomach tightened. It did not move like a person walking. It moved like something hunting. "Damon," she said carefully, "there's someone outside." He was on his feet before she finished the sentence, moving with a speed that did not match a man who had just been stitched up minutes before. He crossed to the window and looked out, his whole body going rigid. "You need to get away from the door," he said, voice low and urgent. "What's happening?" Mia's pulse spiked. "Should I call the police?" "No police," he said again, firmer this time. Stay behind the counter. Please. She had never heard someone say please with that much command in it, like it was both a request and an order at once. She backed toward the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her phone anyway, some instinct telling her to at least be ready to call for help, regardless of what he said. Outside, the shape moved again, closer this time, circling toward the side entrance near the kitchen. Mia's mind raced. Was it an animal? A person? Something about the way it moved defied a simple explanation, and for a moment, she wondered if the exhaustion of a long shift was playing tricks on her eyes. Damon moved toward the side door, positioning himself between it and Mia without seeming to think about it, an automatic instinct to shield her from whatever was coming. His injured side did not seem to slow him at all now, and Mia found herself staring at him with a strange mixture of fear and fascination. "Who are you really?" she whispered. He did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the door, tracking the movement outside with an intensity that made her believe, for the first time, that whatever danger he was hiding from was very real and very close. The rain outside seemed to grow louder, drumming against the roof like a warning. Somewhere in the kitchen, Walter's radio crackled with static before settling back into its quiet jazz, oblivious to the tension building in the front of the diner. Mia gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white, watching the stranger she had met only minutes ago stand guard over her without a single word of explanation. Whatever was out there, it wanted him. And now, standing in the middle of it, it wanted her too. The shape outside stopped moving. For a long moment, nothing happened. The rain kept falling, the jazz kept playing, and Damon kept watching the door like he expected it to burst open at any second. Mia's phone was still in her hand, her thumb hovering over the emergency call button. But something told her that whatever was happening here, the police would not be equipped to handle it. "Get down," Damon said suddenly, and Mia dropped behind the counter on instinct, her heart slamming against her ribs. A crash sounded from the side door, wood splintering as something forced its way through the frame without bothering to open it properly. Mia peeked over the counter just enough to see a figure step into the diner, tall and dressed in dark clothing, a hood pulled low over their face. In their hand was something long and sharp that caught the light from the overhead lamps. Damon moved without hesitation, putting himself directly in the intruder's path. "This doesn't concern her," he said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed too large for the small room. "Leave now, and I won't make this difficult for you." The hooded figure said nothing. They simply raised their weapon and lunged. What happened next blurred together in Mia's memory afterward, no matter how many times she tried to piece it apart. Damon moved faster than she thought any injured man could move, catching the attacker's wrist and twisting it away before the blade could reach him. There was a grunt of pain, a scuffle of feet against tile, and then the intruder staggered back, clutching their arm. But it was not over. Mia saw a second shape moving past the broken door, another figure slipping in through the same gap, this one circling wide toward the counter where she was crouched. Her breath caught in her throat. "Sir," she said, barely above a whisper, "behind you." Damon spun immediately, but the second attacker was already closing the distance, weapon raised toward his exposed back where the wound from earlier had barely stopped bleeding. There was no time for him to fully turn, no time to block it properly. Mia did not think, she acted. She grabbed the heavy metal napkin dispenser from the counter and threw it as hard as she could, striking the second attacker across the shoulder just enough to throw off their aim. At the same moment, she shouted the words that would later be repeated by strangers who had never even met her, words that would follow her for the rest of her life. "Be careful, sir." The warning gave Damon the half-second he needed. He twisted away from the blade, and instead of catching him in the back, it only grazed his arm, tearing through fabric and skin, but missing anything vital. He turned on the second attacker, with a fury Mia had not seen in him before, disarming them in 3 quick, brutal movements, before shoving both intruders back through the broken door and out into the rain. Silence fell over the diner, broken only by the sound of heavy breathing and the storm outside. Damon turned to look at her, blood soaking through his sleeve now, in addition to his side, his amber eyes wide with something that looked almost like disbelief. "You should not have done that," he said, though his voice shook slightly. Mia stood on unsteady legs, her whole body trembling from the adrenaline still coursing through her. "You're welcome," she said. trying to sound braver than she felt. He stared at her for a long moment, like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Whatever he was, whoever he was, something had shifted in the air between them, something that neither of them could take back now. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but the danger had not passed. Not yet. And Mia Turner, the tired waitress who only wanted to finish her shift and go home to her mother, had just stepped into a world far bigger and far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Mia did not sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the wall, replaying the last hour over and over in her mind. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, but the memory of the broken door, the flashing blade, and her own voice shouting into the chaos would not leave her. She kept hearing herself say it. "Be careful, sir." Such a small phrase to carry so much weight. Damon had left the diner shortly after the attack, refusing her offer to call for medical help again, insisting instead that he had people who could treat him properly. Before he walked out into the night, soaked and bleeding but somehow still standing tall, he had turned back to look at her one last time. "You saved my life tonight," he had said. "I do not forget debts like that." Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness beyond the parking lot, and Mia had been left standing in a diner with a broken door, a sleeping cook who somehow missed the entire commotion, and 100 unanswered questions. Now, in the quiet of her small apartment, those questions refused to let her rest. Who was Damon really? What kind of person had two attackers coming after him in the middle of a rainstorm? And why had he moved the way he did, faster and stronger than anyone she had ever seen, even while injured? She thought about waking her mother to talk it through, but Ellen Turner had been asleep for hours, exhausted from her illness and the medication that made her drowsy most evenings. Mia did not want to worry her, not when there was nothing concrete to explain, nothing that would not sound like the ramblings of an overtired mind. By the time the sun rose over Ridgemont, painting the sky in soft shades of orange, Mia had convinced herself that the strange night was over. Whatever had happened, whoever Damon truly was, he was gone now, and life would go back to its normal, exhausting rhythm. She showered, dressed in her uniform, and headed to the diner for her morning shift, trying to push the memory of amber eyes and shouted warnings to the back of her mind. She did not get very far. When she arrived at the Silver Spoon, she found the side door already repaired, the broken frame replaced with new wood that had clearly been installed sometime before dawn. Walter was standing behind the counter, scratching his head in confusion. "Somebody paid for that door already," he said when she walked in. "Left cash in an envelope taped to the counter. No note, no name, nothing." Mia's stomach flipped. She walked over and looked at the spot where the envelope had been, now empty except for a faint outline where tape had pulled at the surface. Whoever had done this had moved quickly and quietly, without leaving any trace of who they were, which told her everything and nothing at the same time. "Strange things happening around here lately," Walter muttered, shaking his head before shuffling back into the kitchen. Mia said nothing, tying her apron with hands that were not quite steady. She spent the morning serving customers, refilling coffee cups, and trying to focus on the mundane rhythm of her job, but her mind kept drifting back to the previous night, to the way Damon had shielded her without thinking twice, to the strange authority in his voice when he told those attackers to leave. It was nearly noon when the bell above the door rang, and Mia looked up to see a woman walk in, dressed in a long coat despite the mild weather outside. She was striking, with sharp cheekbones and dark hair pulled back tightly, and she moved through the diner with the same quiet, controlled grace that Mia had noticed in Damon the night before. The woman walked straight to the counter and sat down, her eyes finding Mia immediately. "You're Mia Turner," she said. It was not a question. Mia's pulse quickened. "Yes. Can I help you with something?" "My name is Grace," the woman said. "I work for Damon." Mia glanced around instinctively, checking that no other customers were close enough to overhear, though the diner was mostly empty at this hour. "Is he all right?" "He is recovering," Grace said carefully, which is more than can be said for most people who take a blade meant for someone else and live to talk about it. Mia's cheeks warmed slightly at the reminder of her own reckless bravery. "I just did what anyone would do." Grace studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her dark eyes. "No," she said finally, "not anyone would do that. Most people would have run. Most people would have called for the police, the second things turned dangerous." I thought about it, Mia admitted. But you didn't, Grace said. That matters more than you know. Mia set down the coffee pot she had been holding, suddenly feeling like the conversation was heading somewhere far more important than small talk about the previous night. What exactly do you want, Grace? Grace glanced around the diner once more, before leaning in slightly, lowering her voice. Damon would like to see you, to thank you properly, and to discuss something important, somewhere private. I have work, Mia said automatically, though the excuse felt thin even to her own ears. Your shift ends at 4, Grace said, which told Mia that whoever these people were, they had already done their research on her schedule. A car will be outside at 5:30. It is entirely your choice whether you get in it. With that, Grace stood, placed a folded piece of paper on the counter, and walked out of the diner without another word, leaving Mia standing there with her heart pounding, and 1,000 new questions crowding out the ones from the night before. She unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. It contained a single address, written in neat, careful handwriting, somewhere on the far edge of town, near the forest that most people in Ridgemont avoided. The rest of Mia's shift passed in a blur. She served customers on autopilot, her mind entirely consumed by the choice sitting in front of her. Every instinct told her to ignore the note, to go home, check on her mother, and pretend the last 24 hours had never happened. But another part of her, the same part that had thrown a napkin dispenser at an armed attacker without hesitation, wanted answers. Wanted to understand who Damon really was, and why saving his life had suddenly pulled her into something far larger than herself. At exactly 4:30, Mia stepped out of the diner and found a sleek black car waiting at the curb, its windows tinted dark enough that she could not see inside. The driver, a quiet man with broad shoulders and a calm expression, stepped out and opened the back door for her without a word. Mia hesitated on the sidewalk, glancing back toward the diner, toward the normal, safe life she had always known. Then she thought about Damon's eyes, about the fear and urgency in his voice when he told those attackers to leave her out of it, and she made her decision. She climbed into the car. The drive took nearly 30 minutes, winding through familiar streets before turning onto roads Mia had never traveled, roads that led deeper into the forest at the edge of town. Tall trees rose on either side, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the afternoon sun, and the farther they drove, the more Mia felt like she was leaving the world she knew behind entirely. Eventually, the car slowed as they approached a massive iron gate set into a stone wall that stretched as far as she could see in either direction. The gate opened automatically, and the car passed through onto a long gravel driveway leading toward a house that was less a house and more of an estate, sprawling and grand, built from dark stone with towering windows that caught the fading afternoon light. Mia's breath caught in her throat. Whoever Damon was, he was clearly not just an ordinary man passing through town with unexplained enemies. This was the home of someone with wealth and power, someone whose world existed on an entirely different scale than the one she had grown up in. The car came to a stop in front of the grand entrance, and the driver opened her door once again. Mia stepped out onto the gravel, staring up at the estate with wide eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. Standing at the top of the stone steps, dressed in clean clothes, with no sign of the previous night's injuries visible, was Damon. He looked entirely different in the golden evening light, more composed, more powerful, though his eyes held the same intensity she remembered from the diner. He descended the steps slowly, his gaze never leaving hers, and when he finally stopped in front of her, there was something almost nervous in the way he studied her face. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Mia looked past him at the enormous house, then back at his face, searching for some explanation in his expression. "You have a lot to tell me," she said. Damon's jaw tightened slightly, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked almost uncertain, like a man standing at the edge of a decision he could not take back. "Yes," he said, "I do." Damon led her through the massive entrance hall, past polished floors and tall windows, into a quiet study lined with old books and a fireplace crackling softly despite the mild weather outside. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, perching on the edge of a leather chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Before I say anything else," Damon began, standing near the fireplace rather than sitting, "I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. I need you to listen to the end before you decide it's madness." Mia nodded slowly, though her heart was pounding. Okay. He took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady, deliberate, like he had rehearsed this moment many times in his mind. There are people in this world who are not entirely human, Mia. People who carry the blood of ancient bloodlines, who are stronger, faster, and different in ways that most of the world will never see or understand. I am one of them. Mia felt a chill run down her spine, though she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. We call ourselves packs, Damon said. Old families, old bloodlines, living quietly alongside everyone else, hidden in plain sight. I lead one of the largest and oldest of these packs. Some call me their king. For a long moment, Mia simply stared at him, waiting for some sign that this was a joke, an elaborate prank designed to embarrass her. But his expression remained serious, almost pained, as if he hated having to say these words out loud. You're telling me you're some kind of... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Werewolf, Damon said quietly, when she could not. Yes. Mia let out a short, disbelieving laugh, standing up from her chair and pacing toward the window. This is insane. This is actually insane. I told you it would sound impossible. You didn't say impossible. You said madness, she snapped, turning back to face him. There's a difference. Damon's expression softened slightly, and he took a careful step toward her, stopping when she instinctively stepped back. I understand, if you don't believe me, he said, but the men who attacked us last night were not ordinary men. They were sent by a rival pack, one that has wanted my position for a long time. Your ordinary napkin dispenser would not have stopped a normal attacker so easily, Mia. It worked because it startled him, broke his focus for half a second. That's all it takes with our kind. Mia thought back to the attack, to the speed and strength both men had displayed, to the way Damon himself had moved, despite his injuries. Pieces that had not made sense before began sliding into place, however impossible they still felt. Prove it, she said finally, crossing her arms. Damon studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He walked toward the study door, opening it and speaking quietly to someone waiting outside. Grace appeared a moment later, along with a tall man Mia had not seen before, both of them stepping into the room with quiet, careful movements. Ethan, Damon said, nodding toward the tall man. Would you mind? Ethan's eyes shifted color almost instantly, going from a normal shade of brown to a deep, glowing gold, the same unnatural hue Mia had noticed in Damon's eyes the night before. Mia's breath caught in her throat as she watched, unable to look away, her mind racing to find some rational explanation, and finding none. That's not possible, she whispered. And yet you're seeing it, Grace said gently. Ethan's eyes returned to their normal brown after a moment, and he offered Mia a small, apologetic smile, as if he understood how overwhelming this all must feel. Mia sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly unsteady beneath her. Why are you telling me this? She asked, looking up at Damon. You could have just thanked me and sent me home. Why bring me into all of this? Damon knelt slightly so he was at eye level with her, his expression more serious than she had seen it yet. Because you're already involved, whether either of us wanted that or not. The men who attacked me last night saw your face. They know you helped me. That makes you a target now, Mia, and I cannot simply send you home and pretend that danger doesn't exist. A cold weight settled in Mia's stomach. A target, she repeated. Because I threw a napkin dispenser at someone. Because you interfered in pack business, Damon said gently. Our world has rules, old and strict ones, and outsiders who get involved, even unintentionally, are rarely left alone afterward. I have enemies who would see you as a way to hurt me, or as evidence to expose our existence to the wider world. Either way, you are no longer simply an outsider looking in. Mia pressed her hands against her face, trying to process the enormity of what he was telling her. Just 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been whether she could afford her mother's next round of medication. Now she was sitting in a mansion, being told that werewolves were real, and that she had somehow become a target in a war she knew nothing about. What happens now? She asked quietly, lowering her hands. Damon exchanged a glance with Grace before answering. I would like you to stay here, at the estate, until we can be certain the threat against you has passed. You would be protected, cared for, and free to leave whenever you wished, though I would strongly advise against it until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. I have a life, Mia said, though her voice wavered slightly. I have a job. I have my mother to take care of. I can't just disappear into some mansion in the woods. I understand, Damon said, and we will make arrangements for your mother's care and your job, if that is what you decide. But please understand, Mia, the danger is real, and it will not simply go away because you wish it would. Mia closed her eyes, taking a slow breath, trying to steady the storm of emotions churning inside her. Fear, disbelief, curiosity, and something else she could not quite name. Something that had been growing since the moment Damon stumbled through the diner door the night before. Why me? She finally asked, opening her eyes to look at him directly. Out of everyone in that diner, why did you let me help you? Why didn't you just leave the second you realized how dangerous it was? Damon was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes searching her face like he was trying to find the right words. Because you didn't hesitate, he said finally. You saw someone hurting and you helped, without knowing anything about who I was, or what danger that might bring you. In my world, that kind of selflessness is rare, Mia. Rarer than you might think. The room fell silent except for the soft crackle of the fireplace, and Mia found herself studying his face, searching for any trace of deception, and finding none. Whatever else was true about this strange, impossible world she had stumbled into, she believed that he meant what he said. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Damon said immediately. Take whatever time you need. Grace will show you to a room where you can rest, and we can talk more whenever you're ready. As Grace led her out of the study, and down a long hallway toward a guest room, Mia's mind raced with everything she had just learned. Werewolves, rival packs, danger she could not begin to understand, and at the center of it all, a man with amber eyes and a quiet, steady kindness that made her want to trust him, even when every rational part of her mind screamed that she should run as far from this place as possible. She did not know it yet, but the choice she had made in that diner, the choice to help a stranger instead of walking away, had already changed the course of her life forever. There would be no simple return to her old world now. The only path left was forward, deeper into a world of danger and secrets that she was only beginning to understand. The guest room Grace led her to was larger than Mia's entire apartment, with tall windows overlooking a garden bathed in the last light of evening. A soft bed sat against one wall, and a small table near the window held a tray of food that smelled far better than anything she had eaten in weeks. Eat something, Grace said gently, noticing Mia's hesitant glance toward the tray. You've had a long day, and there's no reason to face it on an empty stomach. Mia sat down slowly, picking at the food more out of politeness than hunger at first, though the warm bread and simple soup eventually settled some of the tension knotted in her stomach. Grace remained near the door, watching her with a quiet, assessing gaze that reminded Mia of a teacher evaluating a new student. Can I ask you something? Mia said after a while. Of course. What are you? To Damon, I mean. Are you like him? Grace's lips curved into a small smile. I am Pack, yes, though not royal blood like Damon. I serve as his advisor, and, when needed, his protector. I have known him since he was a boy learning to control his abilities. So this whole world, Mia said, gesturing vaguely. Packs, royal blood, all of it. How does it even work? Grace moved to sit in the chair across from her, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Our world is old. Older than most human history books would suggest. Packs are structured much like ancient kingdoms, each with their own territory, their own laws, and their own rulers. Damon's pack, the Moonstone Pack, is one of the largest and strongest in this region, which makes him both respected and, unfortunately, a target for those who covet his position. The men who attacked him, Mia said slowly, they wanted to take his place? There are always those hungry for power, Grace said carefully. Damon has ruled fairly and firmly since he took his position, which has earned him loyalty among most of the packs in this territory. But there are always exceptions, rivals who believe strength alone should decide who rules, rather than fairness or wisdom. Mia thought about this for a long moment, turning her spoon slowly in her soup without really eating it. And now they know about me. Yes, Grace admitted, which is precisely why Damon is so insistent on your safety. It is not simply courtesy, Mia. It is genuine concern. Something in the way Grace said it made Mia look up, studying the woman's expression carefully. You sound like you care about him, about what happens to him. I do, Grace said simply. He has carried a great deal of weight since becoming alpha, more than most people realize. It has been a long time since I have seen him show as much concern for another person's safety as he has shown for yours since last night. Mia felt her cheeks warm slightly, and she looked back down at her food, unsure how to respond to that. She barely knew Damon, had spent less than an hour in his actual presence before tonight, yet something about the quiet intensity in his eyes, the careful way he chose his words, had already settled into her mind, in a way she could not easily shake. "What happens to me now?" she asked instead. "If I stay here, I mean. What does that actually look like?" "You would be given a room here at the estate," Grace explained. "Guarded, protected, free to move within the grounds as you wish. Damon would likely want to introduce you to certain members of the pack, those closest to him, so that you understand more about the world you've stepped into. And in time, once the threat against you has been properly addressed, you would be free to return to your life, should that be what you wish." "Should that be what I wish," Mia repeated quietly. "You say that like you don't think it will be." Grace's expression grew thoughtful, almost knowing. "I have seen many things change in unexpected ways, Mia. I do not presume to know your heart, but I have watched Damon closely for many years, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you tonight." Before Mia could respond to that, a soft knock sounded at the door, and Grace rose to answer it. Damon stood in the hallway, having changed into simpler clothes, his expression less guarded than it had been in the study earlier. "I wanted to check on you," he said, glancing past Grace toward Mia. "May I come in?" Grace excused herself with a small nod, slipping past Damon and leaving the two of them alone in the quiet room. Damon stepped inside hesitantly, as though unsure of his welcome, and Mia found herself gesturing toward the chair Grace had vacated. "You can sit," she said. "I don't bite, unlike, apparently, some people in this house." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Damon's mouth as he sat down across from her. "I suppose that joke was inevitable." "I have several more where that came from," Mia said, though her voice was gentler than her words suggested. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Damon spoke again, his voice quieter now, more personal than it had been during their earlier conversation in the study. "I know this is an enormous amount to take in. I know it would be easier for you to hate me for pulling you into this." "I don't hate you," Mia said honestly. "I'm terrified and confused, and I still think I might wake up tomorrow and realize this was all some strange dream. But I don't hate you." Damon's shoulders relaxed slightly at that, and he studied her with an expression she could not quite name. "Thank you," he said, "for last night, and for staying to hear me out tonight. Most people would have run the moment things turned strange." "I told you already," Mia said. "I've been called stubborn before." "Stubborn," Damon repeated, "or perhaps simply brave." Mia looked away, feeling suddenly self-conscious under the weight of his gaze. "What happens to your pack if word gets out that I know about all of this? About werewolves, and packs, and everything?" Damon's expression grew more serious. "Our existence has remained hidden for centuries, Mia. If it were to be exposed, the consequences would be significant, not just for my pack, but for every pack across the world. Humans and our kind have maintained a fragile peace built entirely on secrecy. Breaking that secrecy could lead to fear, to violence, to consequences neither side would recover from easily." "So I'm dangerous," Mia said slowly, "just by knowing." "You are trusted," Damon corrected gently. "By me, at least. And I intend to make certain that trust is not misplaced, nor is it ever used against you." Mia studied his face for a long moment, searching for any hint of falseness and finding none. Whatever else this strange new world held, whatever dangers lay ahead, she found herself believing him, trusting him, in a way she could not fully explain even to herself. "I'll stay," she said finally. "For now, until things are safer." Relief flickered across Damon's face, quickly hidden beneath his usual composed expression. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I promise you will not regret that decision." Outside the window, the last light of evening faded into darkness, and somewhere beyond the estate's tall stone walls, in the shadows of the forest, unseen eyes watched the grand house with quiet, patient malice, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Morning at the estate looked nothing like mornings at Mia's small apartment. Instead of the sound of traffic and her mother's soft coughing through the thin walls, Mia woke to birdsong drifting through open windows and the smell of fresh bread rising from somewhere below. For a moment, disoriented, She forgot where she was. Then the memory of the previous 2 days crashed back over her, and she sat up quickly, glancing around the unfamiliar room as everything settled back into place. She dressed in clothes that had mysteriously appeared in the closet overnight, simple and comfortable, though clearly far nicer than anything she owned herself. When she stepped out into the hallway, she found Grace waiting for her, looking as composed and alert as she had the day before, despite the early hour. "Sleep well?" Grace asked. "Surprisingly, yes," Mia admitted, though I kept expecting to wake up back in my apartment and realize this was all a dream. "A common reaction," Grace said, a faint smile touching her lips. "Come. Damon has arranged for you to meet a few members of the pack this morning. It will help you understand our world a bit better." Mia's stomach tightened slightly at the thought, but she nodded, following Grace down the wide staircase and through the estate toward a large sunlit room at the back of the house. Several people were already gathered there, standing near tall windows that overlooked the garden, their conversation quieting as Mia and Grace entered. Damon stood near the center of the group, and his expression brightened slightly when he saw her, though he quickly schooled his features into something more composed. "Mia," he said, stepping forward, "I'd like you to meet a few people close to me." He gestured first to Ethan, the man who had shown her his glowing eyes the night before, who offered her a friendly nod. "Ethan is my second in command," Damon explained. "He handles much of the pack's daily affairs and has been at my side since we were young." Ethan smiled warmly. "It's good to properly meet you, Mia. Word of what you did at the diner has already spread through the pack. Not many outsiders show that kind of courage." Mia felt her cheeks warm slightly at the praise, unsure how to respond. Damon continued the introductions, gesturing to a woman with sharp features and dark hair standing near the window. "This is Claire," he said. "She oversees our security and has been instrumental in investigating the attack against us." Claire studied Mia with careful, assessing eyes, though her expression remained polite. "We're still working to identify exactly who sent those attackers," she said. "But rest assured, we will find answers." The last person Damon introduced was an older man with graying hair and a stern expression, who nodded briefly at Mia without offering much warmth. "This is Victor," Damon said, "one of my senior advisors." "A human, brought into pack matters," Victor said, his voice carrying a note of disapproval that he did not bother to hide. "Forgive me for saying so directly, but this is unprecedented, Alpha." "She saved my life, Victor," Damon said, his tone carrying a quiet edge of warning. "I would think that alone earns her a measure of respect." Victor's jaw tightened slightly, though he said nothing further, simply offering Mia a stiff, formal nod before turning his attention elsewhere. Mia felt the weight of his disapproval settle over her, a reminder that not everyone in this world would welcome her presence as easily as Damon and his closer companions seemed to. "Don't mind Victor," Ethan said quietly, once the older man had moved further away. "He's been with the pack a long time. Change doesn't come easily to him." "I understand," Mia said, though the unease lingered. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of introductions and quiet conversations, as Damon and the others explained more about the pack's structure, their laws, and the delicate balance that kept their world hidden from the wider human population. Mia absorbed it all as best she could, though the sheer scale of this hidden world continued to overwhelm her at every turn. By midday, Damon offered to show her the estate's grounds, and Mia accepted gladly, grateful for the chance to step outside into fresh air after the intensity of the morning's meetings. They walked together through the garden, past neat rows of flowers and tall hedges, the tension between them slowly easing into something more comfortable. "Victor doesn't trust me," Mia said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence. "Victor doesn't trust easily," Damon corrected. "It isn't personal, Mia. He has seen the consequences of broken secrecy before, long before I became Alpha. He worries, perhaps rightly, about what could happen if word of our existence spread." "Do you think he's right to worry?" Damon considered the question carefully before answering. "I think caution is wise, but I also believe that fear should not dictate every decision we make. I chose to trust you, Mia, and I do not regret that choice, regardless of Victor's concerns." Mia glanced over at him, studying the quiet conviction in his expression. "Why do you trust me so easily? You barely know me." "I know enough," Damon said simply. "I know that you risked your own safety for a stranger, without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. That tells me more about a person's character than years of careful acquaintance ever could. They continued walking in comfortable silence for a while longer, until they reached a quiet stone bench overlooking a small pond at the edge of the garden. Damon gestured for her to sit, and she did, watching as ripples spread slowly across the water's surface. "Can I ask you something personal?" Mia said after a moment. "Of course. How did you become alpha? Is it something you're born into, or something you earn?" Damon was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the water. "Both, in a way," he said finally. "I was born into the royal bloodline of the Moonstone Pack, which gave me the right to challenge for leadership. But the position itself must be earned, through trials, through proving strength, wisdom, and the ability to protect those who depend on you. My father held the position before me, until his death forced the responsibility onto my shoulders, sooner than I expected." "I'm sorry," Mia said softly. "About your father." "It was a long time ago," Damon said, though something in his voice suggested the wound had not fully healed, even after all these years. "But thank you." Mia studied his profile for a moment, noticing the quiet weight he seemed to carry. The burden of leadership pressed into every careful word and measured movement. "It sounds lonely," she said quietly, "being responsible for so many people." Something flickered across Damon's face, surprise perhaps, at the simple honesty of her observation. "It is," he admitted, "more than most people realize." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer, the quiet companionship settling into something warm and unspoken between them. Mia found herself, for the first time since the chaos of the diner attack, feeling something close to peace, despite the uncertainty still hanging over her future. But even as they sat together by the quiet pond, unseen far beyond the estate's walls, Victor stood in a private study, speaking in hushed tones on an old phone, his expression carefully guarded as he relayed information to someone on the other end of the line, someone whose interests did not align with the peace Damon was trying so carefully to build. Days passed at the estate, each one bringing Mia further into the rhythms of a world she had never known existed. She learned the names of pack members who guarded the grounds at night, learned which hallways led to which wings of the enormous house, and slowly began to feel less like an outsider stumbling through unfamiliar territory. Damon insisted on checking in with her each day, sometimes walking with her through the garden, other times simply sitting with her in the study, while she asked question after question about pack law, history, and customs. She found herself looking forward to these moments more than she wanted to admit. One afternoon, nearly a week after her arrival, Grace found her sitting alone in the library, a thick book about pack history open on her lap. "You've become quite the scholar," Grace said, settling into the chair across from her. Mia smiled faintly. "There's a lot to learn. I figured I might as well understand the world I've stumbled into." "Damon mentioned you've been asking sharp questions," Grace said. "Claire in particular was impressed by your understanding of our security protocols." "I just want to be useful," Mia admitted. "I can't fight like the rest of you, and I can't do whatever it is that lets you all move faster than should be humanly possible. But I can pay attention. I can notice things." Grace studied her thoughtfully. "That is not nothing, Mia. In fact, it may prove more valuable than you realize." Before Mia could respond, a soft chime echoed through the house, and Grace's expression shifted immediately into something more alert. "Security signal," she said, rising quickly from her chair. "Stay here." Mia's heart began to race as Grace hurried from the room, and she closed the book in her lap, straining to hear any sound from the hallway beyond. Minutes passed in tense silence before the door opened again, and Damon stepped inside, his expression tight with concern. "What happened?" Mia asked immediately, rising from her chair. "Someone attempted to breach the eastern perimeter," Damon said. "Our security intercepted them before they reached the house, but this is the third attempt in as many days. Whoever is behind this is growing more persistent." Mia's stomach twisted with unease. "Did they catch anyone?" "No," Damon admitted. "Whoever it is knows our patrol patterns far too well. It's almost as though they have information they shouldn't have access to." Something in the careful way he said it made Mia pause. "You think someone here is helping them?" Damon's jaw tightened, though he did not immediately confirm or deny the suspicion. "I don't want to believe that," he said quietly. "But it would explain a great deal." "Who would it be?" Mia asked. "Who would even have access to that kind of information?" Only a handful of people, Damon admitted. Myself, Grace, Ethan, Claire, and a few senior advisors, including Victor. Mia thought immediately of the tense, disapproving glances Victor had given her since her arrival, of the quiet unease she always felt in his presence. But she hesitated to voice the suspicion outright, unsure if it was fair to accuse someone based on nothing more than a feeling. I don't want to make accusations without proof, she said carefully. But Victor has never seemed comfortable with me being here. Discomfort with an outsider does not make someone a traitor, Damon said, though his tone carried a note of consideration rather than dismissal. But I will have Claire look more closely into recent security patterns, see if anything points toward an internal leak. Over the following days, tension within the estate grew thicker, every member of the pack aware that something was deeply wrong, even if the source remained unidentified. Claire worked tirelessly, reviewing patrol schedules and security logs, searching for any pattern that might reveal the source of the breaches. Mia found herself drawn increasingly into these efforts, offering a fresh perspective that came from someone outside the pack's usual ways of thinking. One evening, poring over patrol schedules alongside Claire in the security office, she noticed something odd. Wait, she said, leaning closer to the documents spread across the table. Every attempted breach happened on nights when this particular patrol route was active. She pointed to a specific section of the schedule. That's not a coincidence. Claire studied the pattern Mia had identified, her expression sharpening with focus. You're right, she said slowly. This route is coordinated directly by, she paused, her expression darkening. By Victor, Mia finished quietly. Claire did not respond immediately, clearly reluctant to accept the implication, but the evidence sitting in front of them was difficult to ignore. She gathered the documents quickly, rising from her chair. I need to show this to Damon. Mia followed Claire through the estate, her heart pounding with a mixture of vindication and dread. If Victor truly was betraying the pack, the consequences would be severe, not just for him, but for the fragile trust holding the pack together during this dangerous time. They found Damon in his study, and Claire wasted no time laying out the evidence they had uncovered. Damon's expression grew increasingly grim as he studied the patrol schedules, the pattern impossible to ignore once pointed out so clearly. This isn't definitive proof, Damon said slowly, though his voice carried little conviction behind the words. But it is enough to warrant a closer look. What do we do? Mia asked. Damon was quiet for a long moment, his expression torn between the loyalty he still felt toward a man who had served his family for years, and the growing certainty that something was deeply wrong. We watch him, he said finally, carefully and quietly, until we have proof strong enough to act on. If Victor truly is responsible for these breaches, I want to understand why, and who he's working with, before we confront him directly. Claire nodded, already formulating a plan of careful surveillance, while Mia stood quietly to the side, watching the weight of leadership settle heavily onto Damon's shoulders once again. She realized, in that moment, just how much responsibility rested on him at all times, how every decision carried consequences that rippled far beyond himself. Later that evening, after Claire had left to begin organizing the surveillance, Damon found Mia sitting alone in the garden, watching the last light of evening fade behind the tall trees at the estate's edge. You did well today, he said, sitting down beside her, noticing that pattern. Most people would have missed it entirely. I told you I could be useful, Mia said, though a heaviness lingered in her voice. I just wish it hadn't been Victor. I wish it had been anyone else. I understand, Damon said quietly. Betrayal from someone close is always the hardest to accept. They sat together in silence for a while, the weight of the discovery settling over both of them, along with the unspoken knowledge that whatever came next would test the pack and their fragile trust in each other, more severely than anything that had come before. The days that followed carried a strange, quiet tension throughout the estate, as everyone went about their normal routines, while carefully watching Victor from a careful distance. Mia found the pretense exhausting, smiling politely at a man she now believed had been feeding information to their enemies, all while Claire's surveillance quietly gathered evidence in the background. Damon seemed to carry the weight of it more heavily than anyone else, his expression growing more guarded with each passing day. Mia noticed the toll it took on him, the way his shoulders remained tense even during quiet moments, the way sleep seemed to elude him more often than not. One evening, she found him standing alone on a balcony overlooking the dark garden below, his hands braced against the stone railing, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. "You should be resting," she said softly, stepping up beside him. "I could say the same to you," Damon replied, though a faint smile touched his lips as he glanced over at her. "I couldn't sleep," Mia admitted. "Too much on my mind." "Same," Damon said quietly. They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, the cool night air settling around them, the distant sound of crickets filling the quiet. Mia studied his profile in the moonlight, noticing the exhaustion etched into his features, the burden he carried so quietly most of the time. "Can I tell you something?" she said finally. "Of course." "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just about Victor, or the attacks, or any of it. I'm scared about how much my life has changed in such a short time. A few weeks ago, my biggest worry was making rent and affording my mother's medication. Now I'm helping investigate a conspiracy inside a world I didn't even know existed." Damon turned to face her fully, his expression softening. "I never wanted to pull you into danger, Mia. If there had been any way to protect you without asking so much of you, I would have chosen it." "I know," Mia said, "but I don't regret it. Not really. Strange as it sounds, I think I'd rather be here, facing all of this, than back in my old life pretending none of it exists." Something in Damon's expression shifted, a warmth entering his gaze that had not been there before. "You are remarkable, you know," he said quietly. "Most people would resent being pulled into something this dangerous. You've embraced it instead." Mia felt her cheeks warm under his gaze, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the space between them charged with something unspoken and fragile. "Damon," she said softly, "can I ask you something else?" "Anything." "Why does it feel like this?" she asked. "Whatever this is, between us. I've known you less than 2 weeks, and yet it feels like more," Damon finished quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Mia nodded, unable to find further words, and Damon reached out slowly, his fingers brushing gently against her hand where it rested on the stone railing. Neither of them pulled away. "In our world," Damon said quietly, "there are bonds that form between certain individuals, connections that go beyond ordinary attraction or affection. We call it a mate bond. It is rare, and it is not something that can be forced or chosen deliberately. It simply happens when the universe decides two people belong together." Mia's breath caught in her throat. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that since the moment you shouted that warning in the diner, I have felt something I have never felt before," Damon admitted. "A pull toward you that defies explanation. I did not want to burden you with this so soon, given everything else you're already facing, but I could not keep it from you any longer." Mia stared at him, her heart pounding, 1,000 emotions colliding inside her chest at once. Fear, excitement, disbelief, and something warmer, something that felt startlingly like recognition, as though some part of her had been waiting for this exact moment without knowing it. "This is a lot," she said finally, her voice unsteady. "I know," Damon said gently. "And I do not expect anything from you, Mia. I only wanted you to know the truth, rather than let you wonder why everything between us has felt so complicated from the very beginning." Mia looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, searching for any trace of doubt or hesitation in his expression, and finding none. "I don't know what to do with this information," she admitted honestly. "But I don't want you to let go of my hand either." A quiet smile spread across Damon's face, warm and genuine, in a way she had not seen from him before. "Then I won't," he said softly. They stood together on the balcony for a long while. After that, the weight of the conspiracy and the danger still surrounding them, momentarily forgotten in the quiet space they had carved out for themselves. But even as the moment stretched on, somewhere within the estate, unseen and unheard, Victor moved quietly through a hidden passage, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and urgent, as he relayed a new piece of information to the voice waiting on the other end. "They suspect something," Victor murmured. "We need to move faster than planned." The voice on the other end offered a cold, calculated response, and Victor's expression hardened with resolve. Whatever plan had been set into motion against Damon and his pack was accelerating now, driven by the growing suspicion closing in around their inside source, and the fragile peace Mia and Damon had just found together stood on the edge of a storm neither of them could yet see coming. The following morning, Claire arrived at breakfast with an urgency that immediately silenced the quiet conversation around the table. Her expression was tight, her usually composed demeanor replaced with visible tension. "We have a problem," she said, glancing at Damon. "Victor left the estate late last night, without informing anyone. He returned just before dawn." Damon set down his cup slowly, his expression darkening. "Do we know where he went?" "Not yet," Claire admitted. "But I managed to track part of his route before losing him near the old mill road outside town. That area has no reason for anyone from the estate to visit unless meeting someone in secret." Mia's stomach tightened as she listened, the earlier warmth of the previous night's conversation with Damon, replaced now with a cold sense of dread. Whatever Victor was doing, it was clearly escalating, and the danger surrounding all of them was growing more immediate by the day. "We can't wait any longer," Ethan said firmly, entering the room and catching the tail end of the conversation. "If he's meeting with our enemies, every day we delay confronting him gives them more time to plan their next move." Damon rubbed his temples, clearly wrestling with the weight of the decision ahead. "I want proof before I act," he said finally. "Accusing a senior advisor without solid evidence could tear this pack apart, especially if I'm wrong." "And if you're right?" Claire asked quietly. "How much more time do we have before he does something none of us can undo?" The room fell into tense silence, everyone aware of the impossible position Damon found himself in. Mia watched him carefully, seeing the toll this decision was taking, the weight of leadership pressing down on him in a way she had not fully understood until this moment. "I have an idea," she said quietly, drawing everyone's attention. "What if we set a trap? Something that would force Victor to reveal himself, without putting anyone at direct risk." "What kind of trap?" Damon asked, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Mia took a breath, the plan forming quickly in her mind as she spoke. "You said Victor has access to sensitive information about pack security. What if you deliberately let slip a piece of false information, something significant enough that he would feel compelled to pass it along immediately? If his contacts act on that false information, we'll know for certain he's the source of the leak." Claire's expression sharpened with interest. "It could work," she said slowly, "if we're careful about how the information is shared and who has access to it." Damon studied Mia for a long moment, something like admiration flickering behind his eyes. "You continue to surprise me," he said quietly. "I told you I could be useful," Mia replied, though a nervous energy hummed beneath her calm exterior. Over the following hours, Damon, Claire, and Ethan worked carefully to construct the plan, deciding on a piece of false information convincing enough to draw Victor's attention, while ensuring the trap could not backfire and put innocent pack members at risk. They decided to suggest, within Victor's hearing, that Damon intended to travel to a neighboring pack's territory the following evening for a private, unguarded meeting, a piece of information that would prove irresistible to any enemy hoping to catch him vulnerable. That evening, during a carefully orchestrated conversation in the study, Damon mentioned the fabricated travel plans to Ethan, deliberately raising his voice enough to ensure Victor, who was working nearby, would overhear the details. Mia watched from a distance, her heart pounding, as she observed Victor's reaction, the flicker of interest that crossed his face, before he quickly composed himself and returned to his work. That night, Claire's surveillance team watched Victor's movements closely, and just past midnight, he slipped away from the estate once again, moving quickly and carefully through the darkened grounds, toward the same hidden path leading to the old mill road. Mia sat with Damon in the study, both of them waiting anxiously for word from Claire's team, the tension in the room thick enough to feel physically heavy. Finally, near dawn, Claire returned, her expression grim but resolute. "We have him," she said. Recorded conversation, clear as day. He relayed the false travel plans directly to a contact from the Ashgrove pack, the same pack we've suspected of orchestrating the attacks against you. Damon closed his eyes briefly, the confirmation landing with the weight of a blow, despite having half expected it. "Bring him in," he said finally, his voice hardening with resolve. "Quietly, I want to speak with him myself before anything else happens." Within the hour, Victor was brought before Damon in a private chamber, deep within the estate, his expression a mixture of defiance and resignation, as he realized the depth of what had been uncovered. Mia stood quietly at the edge of the room, watching the confrontation unfold, her heart aching despite everything Victor had done. "Why?" Damon asked simply, his voice steady, despite the obvious pain beneath it. You served my father. You've served this pack for decades. Why betray us now? Victor's jaw tightened, though after a long moment, he finally spoke, his voice heavy with something that sounded almost like regret. Because I watched your father weaken this pack through misplaced mercy, and I have watched you follow the same path, extending trust to outsiders who could expose everything we've spent centuries protecting. His gaze flicked briefly toward Mia before returning to Damon. The Ashgrove pack promised stability, strength, a return to the old ways, where weakness was not tolerated. And in exchange, Damon said quietly, you were willing to see me killed, to see innocent lives put at risk, all for the promise of strength you speak of. Victor did not answer, his silence confirming everything Damon needed to know. The weight of the betrayal settled heavily over the room, and Mia watched as something hardened in Damon's expression. The quiet warmth she had come to know replaced now with the cold resolve of a leader forced to make an impossible decision. You will be held until the Pack Council can convene to determine your fate, Damon said finally, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. Take him. As guards led Victor from the room, Damon remained standing in place for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides, the exhaustion and grief of the betrayal finally showing through his composed exterior. Mia moved quietly to his side, resting a gentle hand on his arm. You did what you had to do, she said softly. I know, Damon said, though his voice carried little comfort. That doesn't make it easier. They stood together in the quiet aftermath, the immediate danger of Victor's betrayal finally addressed, though both of them understood that the larger threat, the Ashgrove pack and whatever plans they still had in motion, remained far from resolved. The battle ahead was only beginning, and neither of them yet knew just how close the final confrontation truly was. With Victor's betrayal confirmed and contained, the estate fell into a strange, watchful quiet over the following days. Claire doubled the security patrols, adjusting every pattern and protocol that Victor might have shared with the Ashgrove pack, while Damon spent long hours in tense conversations with allied pack leaders, trying to determine the scale of the threat still facing them. Mia found herself included in more of these conversations than she had expected, her outsider's perspective proving valuable more than once, as the pack worked to anticipate their enemy's next move. She sat quietly during a strategy meeting one afternoon, listening as Damon, Ethan, and Claire debated the likelihood of a direct assault now that their inside source had been removed. They'll know we've discovered Victor by now, Ethan said, pacing near the window, which means they'll either retreat and regroup, or accelerate whatever plan they have left, hoping to strike before we can fully prepare. Ashgrove has never been patient, Claire added grimly. I'd wager on the second option. Damon nodded slowly, his expression tight with concentration. We need to assume they'll move soon, and move directly. Every patrol needs to be doubled, and I want the perimeter sensors checked personally, not just by the usual rotation. As the meeting continued, Mia found her mind drifting back to something she had read in the pack history books during her long hours in the library. Wait, she said suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. The old records mention something about how Ashgrove's leadership operates. Their alpha rarely takes direct action himself. He prefers to send others to do the dangerous work, while he remains protected. That's true, Damon said slowly, studying her with interest. Their alpha, Nathan, has always been cautious about personal risk. So if they're planning something big, Mia continued, it's likely they'll try to draw you out somehow, rather than attacking the estate directly. They'd want you isolated, away from your strongest defenses. Claire's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. She's right. A direct assault on the estate would be costly for them, especially now that we're on high alert. But if they can lure Damon away, somewhere with fewer guards, they could accomplish the same goal with far less risk to themselves, Ethan finished grimly. Damon rubbed his jaw, considering the implications carefully. Then we need to be cautious about any invitation or request that pulls me away from the estate in the coming days, no matter how legitimate it appears. As if summoned by the very conversation, a knock sounded at the door, and one of the household staff entered, carrying a sealed letter with an unfamiliar crest stamped into the wax. This arrived for you, Alpha, the staff member said, offering the letter to Damon. Damon opened it carefully, his expression shifting into something guarded as he read the contents. It's an invitation, he said slowly. From a neutral pack requesting a meeting to discuss updated boundary agreements. They want me to attend personally, alone, at a location of their choosing. That's exactly the kind of trap we just discussed, Claire said immediately. The neutral pack requesting this meeting has always been trustworthy, Damon said, though uncertainty colored his voice. But given the timing, I cannot dismiss the possibility that Ashgrove has somehow influenced or coerced them into extending this invitation. Mia felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. You're not seriously considering going. Damon's expression grew troubled. If I refuse, and the invitation is genuine, I risk damaging an important alliance at a time when we need every ally we can secure. But if I accept, and it's a trap, then you're walking directly into whatever Ashgrove has planned, Ethan finished grimly. The room fell into tense silence as everyone considered the impossible choice before them. Mia watched Damon closely, seeing the familiar weight of leadership settling over him once again, the burden of decisions that could cost lives no matter which path he chose. What if you don't go alone? Mia said finally. The invitation specifically requests that I attend without escort, Damon said. Refusing that condition could be seen as an insult, or worse, an admission of weakness. Then don't bring an obvious escort, Mia said, an idea forming quickly in her mind. But that doesn't mean you have to walk in completely unprotected. What if Claire's team positioned themselves nearby, out of sight, ready to respond if anything goes wrong? You'd technically be honoring the terms of the invitation, while still having support close enough to act if needed. Claire considered this thoughtfully. It could work, provided we have enough time to properly scout the meeting location and position our people without being detected. Damon studied the invitation once more, his expression hardening with resolve. Then that is what we will do, he said finally. Claire, begin preparations immediately. I want your team in position, well before the scheduled meeting time. As the room broke into focused activity, everyone moving quickly to prepare for the dangerous meeting ahead, Mia found herself pulled aside by Damon, his expression softening slightly as he looked at her. Thank you, he said quietly, for seeing a path forward when the rest of us were only seeing an impossible choice. I just don't want anything to happen to you, Mia admitted honestly. Damon reached out, gently taking her hand in his. I intend to come back from this meeting, Mia. I have far too much to return to now. Mia felt warmth spread through her chest, despite the fear still coiling in her stomach, and she squeezed his hand gently in response. You'd better, she said softly. I didn't throw a napkin dispenser at an armed attacker, just so you could get yourself hurt somewhere else entirely. A genuine laugh escaped Damon, brief but warm, cutting through the tension of the moment. I will keep that in mind, he said, before releasing her hand and turning to join the preparations already underway. As the estate buzzed with careful, urgent activity in the hours that followed, Mia could not shake the feeling that whatever happened at that meeting would determine far more than just the outcome of a single confrontation. The fate of the pack, and perhaps the fragile, precious connection she had found with Damon, hung delicately in the balance, waiting to see which way the coming storm would break. The meeting location turned out to be an old clearing, deep within the forest, roughly an hour's drive from the estate, chosen deliberately by the neutral pack to signal impartial ground. Claire's team had scouted the area thoroughly over the previous day, identifying vantage points and confirming, as best they could, that no obvious ambush had been prepared in advance. Mia stayed behind at the estate, though the waiting proved almost unbearable. She paced the length of the study, glancing repeatedly at the clock, her mind conjuring every possible disaster that could unfold at the meeting. Grace remained with her, offering quiet reassurance, despite the tension visible in her own composed expression. He will be fine, Grace said, though Mia noticed the way her hands remained clasped tightly together. Damon has faced difficult negotiations before. This feels different, Mia said. Everything about this feels different. As the hours stretched on, word finally arrived through a secure communication line that Damon had arrived safely at the clearing, and the meeting had begun without immediate incident. Mia allowed herself a small breath of relief, though the tension did not fully dissipate, some instinct warning her that the danger was far from over. At the clearing, Damon stood facing the neutral pack's representatives, a small delegation led by an older woman named Sophie, whose expression carried the same careful neutrality that had defined her pack's reputation for generations. The discussion of boundary agreements proceeded smoothly at first, both sides working through the details with practiced diplomacy. But partway through the meeting, Damon's sharp senses picked up something wrong, a subtle shift in the air, a faint scent carried on the breeze that did not belong to Sophie's delegation. His body tensed, though he kept his expression carefully composed, continuing the conversation, while his mind raced to assess the threat. "Is something wrong, Alpha Blackwood?" Sophie asked, noticing his sudden alertness. "Perhaps nothing," Damon said carefully, though his eyes scanned the tree line surrounding the clearing. "How many members of your delegation traveled with you today?" Sophie's brow furrowed with confusion. "4. As agreed upon in advance. Why do you ask?" Damon's stomach tightened with dread, as he realized the scent he detected did not belong to any of Sophie's people. Someone else had followed them, or worse, had been waiting nearby all along, using the neutral meeting as cover, to close in undetected. "We may have a problem," Damon said quietly, just as the first arrow whistled through the air, striking one of Sophie's guards in the shoulder, and sending the clearing into immediate chaos. Damon reacted instantly, years of training taking over as he pulled Sophie behind him, shielding her from the sudden onslaught, while shouting a warning to Claire's hidden team. Figures emerged from the tree line, moving with the same coordinated aggression Damon recognized from the attack at the diner weeks earlier. "Ashgrove," he growled, recognizing the attacker's markings, even as he moved to intercept the nearest threat. The clearing erupted into a fierce, chaotic battle, Claire's team emerging from their hidden positions to engage the attackers, while Damon fought to protect both himself and Sophie's vulnerable delegation. Despite the surprise of the ambush, the careful preparations Mia had suggested proved crucial, Claire's team turning what could have been a devastating trap into a fierce, evenly matched confrontation. Damon fought with controlled ferocity, disarming attacker after attacker, while keeping himself positioned between the threat and Sophie's people. Across the clearing he caught sight of Nathan, Ashgrove's alpha, standing at the edge of the trees, watching the chaos unfold, with cold, calculating eyes, rather than joining the fight directly, exactly as the pack's history had suggested he would. Damon shouted across the clearing, his voice carrying with unnatural clarity through the chaos. "You send others to fight your battles, while you hide in the shadows." Nathan's expression twisted with anger at the accusation, though he remained where he stood, unwilling to risk himself directly. "You will not survive this meddling, Blackwood," he called back. "Your pack's days are numbered." "We'll see about that," Damon growled, redoubling his efforts against the remaining attackers. Slowly, methodically, Claire's team and Damon's own fierce defense began turning the tide of the battle, attacker after attacker falling back, or being subdued entirely. Realizing the ambush had failed to achieve its intended surprise, Nathan finally retreated into the trees, calling for his remaining forces to withdraw rather than risk further losses. As the clearing fell quiet once again, the immediate danger passed, Damon turned to check on Sophie, finding her shaken but unharmed, along with the rest of her delegation, save for the guard who had taken the initial arrow, now being tended to by Claire's medical-trained team members. "I owe you my life," Sophie said, her earlier composure replaced now with genuine gratitude. "Ashgrove clearly intended to use this meeting to eliminate both of us at once, weakening two packs in a single strike. They underestimated the preparation my people put into protecting this meeting," Damon said grimly, though relief colored his voice as he surveyed the clearing, confirming that his own people had survived the encounter with only minor injuries. As the delegation began the careful process of returning to their respective territories, Damon allowed himself a brief moment to breathe, the adrenaline of the battle slowly fading as the reality of how close the ambush had come to succeeding settled fully over him. Had it not been for the careful precautions Mia suggested, this meeting could have ended in catastrophe. Back at the estate, word finally arrived that Damon and his team had returned safely, and Mia felt the tension holding her shoulders rigid finally release. In a rush of overwhelming relief, she hurried to the front entrance, arriving just as the vehicles pulled up the long driveway, and the moment Damon stepped out, exhausted but unharmed, she crossed the distance between them without hesitation, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "You're safe," she whispered against his shoulder. "Thanks to you," Damon murmured, holding her close, the weight of the day's danger finally easing in the warmth of her embrace. "Your plan saved lives today, Mia. Mine included." Mia pulled back slightly to look up at him, relief and affection mingling openly in her expression. "I told you to come back," she said softly. "And I always intend to keep my promises to you," Damon replied, his voice warm, despite the exhaustion still evident in his features. As they stood together in the fading evening light, the danger of Ashgrove's failed ambush still fresh but successfully overcome, both of them understood that this confrontation, while significant, was likely not the final battle in the growing conflict between their packs. But for now, in this quiet moment of relief and reunion, they allowed themselves simply to be grateful for each other's safety, and for the strength of the bond that continued to grow steadily between them with each passing, dangerous day. In the weeks that followed the failed ambush, the tension surrounding the Moonstone pack slowly began to ease. Reports came in that Nathan, having lost several of his best fighters and failed twice to eliminate Damon, was retreating from active conflict, at least for the time being, choosing instead to consolidate his own weakened position rather than risk further losses. Victor's fate was decided by the Pack Council. His decades of prior service weighed carefully against the severity of his betrayal, resulting in permanent exile from Moonstone territory rather than a harsher punishment, a decision Damon made with a heavy heart but firm resolve. Through it all, Mia remained at the estate, her bond with Damon deepening steadily with each passing day. She had long since stopped questioning whether she belonged in this strange, extraordinary world, finding instead that she had carved out a place for herself within it, respected not despite being human, but because of the courage and clarity she brought to every challenge the pack faced. Even Victor's absence seemed to shift something within the pack's culture, other advisors who had once shared his quiet skepticism toward Mia gradually warming to her presence, impressed by her resourcefulness and her unwavering loyalty to Damon and the people around him. One evening, nearly 2 months after the night she had first stumbled into danger at the Silver Spoon Diner, Damon called for a gathering of the entire pack within the estate's great hall, a formal assembly that Mia had learned was reserved for only the most significant occasions. Standing before the assembled pack, Damon's voice carried clearly through the hall, steady and sure. "Many of you have watched, these past months, as an outsider became something far more significant to our pack than any of us could have anticipated," he began, his eyes finding Mia where she stood near the front of the gathering. "Mia Turner did not simply save my life on a rainy night in a small-town diner. She has, again and again, proven herself wiser, braver, and more devoted to this pack's well-being than many who were born into it." A murmur passed through the assembled crowd, though it carried more warmth than the skepticism Mia might have expected months earlier. "Our laws have long forbidden a bond between alpha and human," Damon continued, rooted in fears of exposure and vulnerability that, while understandable, no longer serve the world we live in today. "I stand before you now, not simply as your alpha, but as a man who has found in Mia Turner a bond deeper and truer than anything I believed possible." He turned to face Mia directly, taking her hands gently in his own as she stood before him, her heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and overwhelming emotion. "Mia," he said quietly, though his voice carried through the silent hall, "you have already proven yourself worthy of this pack's respect and loyalty 100 times over. I am asking you now, before everyone gathered here, to stand beside me, not simply as someone I care for, but as my mate, and as Queen of the Moonstone Pack, should you choose to accept that role." Tears gathered in Mia's eyes as she looked around at the assembled pack, faces she had come to know and respect over these past difficult months, faces that now watched her with open acceptance rather than the wary skepticism she had once feared. She looked back at Damon, at the quiet hope and vulnerability in his amber eyes, and she felt, with complete certainty, that this was exactly where she belonged. "Yes," she said softly, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I choose you. I choose this. All of it." The great hall erupted into warm applause and cheers, the assembled pack embracing the moment with genuine joy, a stark contrast to the uncertainty and suspicion that had once surrounded Mia's arrival. Damon pulled her close, his relief and happiness evident in every line of his expression, and for a long moment, the two of them simply stood together, letting the celebration wash over them. Later that evening, after the formal gathering had given way to a more relaxed celebration throughout the estate, Mia stepped out onto the same balcony where Damon had first told her about the mate bond weeks earlier, looking out over the moonlit garden below. Damon joined her a few minutes later, wrapping an arm gently around her shoulders as they stood together in comfortable silence. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Mia leaned into him, a genuine smile spreading across her face as she thought back over the incredible journey that had brought her here. From an exhausted waitress serving coffee in a small-town diner, to standing here now, beside the Alpha King, about to become queen of a hidden world she had never known existed. "Not a single one," she said honestly, "though I still think you owe me for that ruined shirt from the diner." Damon laughed, the sound warm and genuine, echoing softly into the quiet night. "I believe I owe you considerably more than that," he said, pulling her closer. "I owe you everything." As they stood together beneath the stars, the danger and uncertainty of the past months finally settling into peaceful resolution, Mia realized that saving a stranger's life on that rainy night had not simply changed her own path. It had given her something she never knew she was searching for: purpose, belonging, and a love so unexpected and profound that it had reshaped both of their lives forever. The waitress and the Alpha King, once strangers brought together by a moment of danger, now stood united, ready to face whatever challenges still lay ahead, together, as equals, and as two hearts bound by a connection stronger than any law or tradition could ever hope to break.